Welcome to the Story 516 podcast, where we sit down with Christians from across denominations and talk about how God is at work in the world today and inspire you to see God at work in your own life in new ways. Welcome, everyone, to the Story 516 podcast. I'm joined today by Matt Tingblad, a friend of mine from back in college days. I think we got to know each other, and then you've since gone on and done some really exciting work yourself.
Yeah, uh, it, it's been a while. I mean, gosh, I first entered college as a roommate of your younger brother, but then by virtue of that and some of our same connections and friends started to get to know you, and it's been a fun ride. But it was a it was a while ago. I'm not sure how much I want to admit how long ago it was.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I was curious, Matt, if you could just start off by kind of telling a little bit about your background and kind of what has led you to your current position.
Certainly. So, my background, long story short, would be this: that I grew up in a Christian home, ended up becoming a follower of Christ pretty early on in my life. But then, when I was in undergraduate school, I had a sense in which the Lord was calling me to develop content to grow and strengthen the church and take that everywhere I can. I didn't know what that would look like, but after I graduated college, I saw an opportunity to serve as a traveling intern for Josh McDowell. Now, for those who don't know, Josh is a pretty well established Christian evangelist and apologist, which is somebody who helps give reasons why we can believe Christianity is true. And he needed a traveling assistant, so I applied, got accepted, ended up going around the States and some international trips with Josh to get to see what that life was like. But during that time, I remember asking Josh, like, "Hey, this is my vision. I'd love to do what you're doing, traveling around and speaking." And I asked, "Well, should I go to seminary for this?" Which in hindsight was kind of a silly question. And Josh just looked at me and he's like, "Well, yeah." and, and so I went to seminary, spent 4 years there, got an MDiv in pastoral and general ministries. And during that time, Josh McDowell Ministry converted from a one-speaker ministry to a multi-speaker ministry. And they asked if I wanted to join that team as a speaker, doing evangelism and apologetics, helping people understand why we can trust Christianity is true. And I'm like, absolutely. It was really made a lot of sense with where I felt I was going and where the Lord was taking me. And that's where I'm at now.
Exciting. I remember the first time that I saw the updates that you were interning with Josh McDowell. And I was just like, really? That's really cool. Because it's
Yeah.
not every day that someone gets in with, like, I don't know. I feel like Josh McDowell's, like you said, an established name in kind of Christian, in the Christian community.
He is probably more so established with the generation after us. I mean, in our generation, there was a moment when Josh moved from the college campuses to focus more on like younger students and parents. And in that move, I think our generation, the millennials, we kind of didn't see him as much as some of the others, sort of skipped over us. But when I started to learn more about Josh McDowell and the influence he's had all around the world, I started to realize, like, oh my gosh, this is this is really something else. I mean, he has his book More Than a Carpenter, which many people have heard of, is translated in about 100 languages now, which gives it such an extraordinary international impact. And so Josh is a pretty big name, even in other places outside of the United States.
Nice, nice. So when you speak now with his ministry, do you find yourself speaking a lot to primarily like college campuses?
I would say that at this stage, I'm speaking to pretty much any audience that would have me. Many of those are college campuses, but when they are college campuses, they're usually local things because colleges don't always have a ton of budget to bring out speakers, unless we're looking at some really big name speakers like Josh or others. So I've done some college campuses, mostly local, but then I've also done traveling events, often to speak at conferences. Maybe I'll be a breakout speaker at a conference, or A camp might invite me to be one of their speakers. I've also done certain church events. Like there's one thing in Washington where they had this one-day discipleship thing, and they invited me to be the speaker for that. Different types of things. So it's been pretty diverse and pretty fun.
That's cool. I like that idea of like not being I don't know, pigeonholed doesn't seem like the right word, uh but like just stuck to one specific audience. It's really cool that you were able to branch out, and you've branched out to have your own YouTube channel,
Hmm.
which I'll watch. That's really cool to see just the variety of ways that you are able to reach out as your own speaker, and create content and engage with people. How have you found that process? Do you find it easier like to connect with people online through like social media, or do you make a lot of connections in person?
For me, probably the more significant stories of connections I've made have been in person. I'm not as active online as somebody in my career probably ought to be. Like I don't I don't spend a whole lot of time on social media. My strongest presence online is YouTube. But even there, I usually don't spend a ton of time in the comments.
That's probably healthy.
Yeah.
From what I've heard about other people's YouTube comment sections, it's like, yeah, it's not the probably the most edifying place to frequent.
And the kind of content I make isn't necessarily content that's going to make a ton of friends. I mean, explaining why we can trust Christianity is true. In a world that is becoming more and more anti-Christian, yeah, the comments can be a little wild. But I'll peek at them once in a while and respond when I think it's appropriate. But other times, I just kind of let a video go on its own. And when I notice that there's a ton of comments on a video, then at that point, I recognize like, okay, there's other people who are responding to certain comments and stuff like that. So there's conversation happening even in my absence. I think it's a good area of growth for many Christians to have, and I would recognize that there's a lot of space for me to grow here to become comfortable in hostile environments, including the YouTube comment section.
Well, I bet that's a little safer of an environment to kind of like grow accustomed to pushback on your ideas than out at a college campus or out at a speaking event and have someone like engage you kind of face to face.
In some ways, sometimes I wonder, I think I might prefer in-person hostile events, which might make me a bit unusual, but it is nice to see the person there rather than just words on a screen. Because maybe it is, I mean, you've probably noticed people are generally a little more hostile when there isn't that face-to-face connection.
That's a good point.
It takes a lot of wisdom as a Christian communicator to be a light and to share truth, but to also not just, how should I say, feed into a person's desire to just pick a fight. Sometimes I'll read comments and it's like any kind of response I give will just give them ammo to continue doing what they do. And I don't see that that's necessary. But if it was an in-person conversation, then I might be able to maneuver that conversation a little better and have a more, ironic conversation with the person.
Well, one thing we like to talk about on this podcast is how you see God at work in the world today. It was kind of part of the mission behind starting this that I felt like, especially after the last like from like 2019 through 2020 and 2021, I feel like many more people are asking the question, where are you, God? Like,
Mm-hmm.
does God even exist? And I know like with apologetics, you're facing that question head on. Then I found that when I talk to people and have conversations with friends, that they would give me examples of God at work in the world today.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm just curious, kind of from your perspective, your field dealing with apologetics, these speaking events, like how are you seeing God move and God at work?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question of a story which comes to mind of how I saw God work recently. Maybe to just give a little bit of context to what you were saying, Zach, is in apologetics, for listeners who might not know, there are a number of like reasons why we can believe that God exists. Certain things like the cosmological argument, the ontological argument that some people will use, the teleological argument, these like different philosophical things for the existence of God. And so I'll go there. But then on the other side, there's these these ways in which we witness God in our everyday life. And it sounds like that's where you're focusing, Zach, so that's where I will focus too. I remember a couple of weeks ago, I was speaking out of state at a college campus. This was Pennsylvania State in Behrend, or Penn State of Behrend. It's not the Penn State, but it's a Penn State on the west side of Pennsylvania. And this happened because I had spoken earlier in Washington, D.C. Some people were there who saw me. They're like, hey, this is cool. And then they invited me to come speak at their college campus for this outreach event. The idea was to invite a bunch of people to come hear Matthew Tingblad talk about why we can trust Christianity is true. Okay, so it's like right in my space. This is what I do. And I was very excited to fly out there to give my presentation. They also wanted me to present the gospel and give an invite for anybody who might like to receive Christ in their life and all that. So cool, evangelistic, apologetic, that is right in my lane. Love it. So I flew out, did the thing, and I remember the turnout of the event was, I'm not sure if I can catch the right number, but probably like between 20 and 30 students showed up. A good handful of them were students who were already part of the ministry that was putting this on. And so there weren't a ton of new students who came out to see me and really think through these questions of God with me as non-believers that they would. But there were maybe like a handful, like 5 or 6 or something like that. Okay. So like, that's cool. Got a few out. It's not as big of a turnout as the organization was hoping for. I think they were shooting for more around like 50 or 60. But, you know, I went on stage, I did my thing, spoke, presented, gave the gospel. I asked if any students wanted to receive Christ and did not get any response. So there were no people in that moment who were like, yeah, I want to become a Christian. And I remember also during a lot of that conversation while I was on stage, it felt a little unresponsive. Like, okay, I'm trying as a speaker, you know, sometimes the audience is really with you, they're connecting. Other times it's just like they're just kind of glued in place. And my goal as a speaker is to unglue them so that we can have some nice, fun interaction, keep it engaging. It was hard for me to read the students during this event. So kind of, I'm not sure if I'd say I was struggling, but it was just like I wasn't connecting as much as they would have liked. And then during the ask for receiving the gospel, didn't get any response. However, when this was over, I stepped off, stage and got some students commenting, hey, good job, da-da-da. And there was this one guy who came, he wasn't a Christian, and he had been exploring questions of Christianity for a while. So we got to talking, and a couple of the students came around and joined the conversation. And we talked for a while, and as I looked around, I noticed that there were other groups that had kind of gathered together of other students talking in their own circles, presumably about the evening, the content that was shared and so forth. And it was so interesting to me because my conversation and all those other conversations around me were going on for about 90 minutes at least, longer than the time I was even on stage. So I asked one of the leaders of that movement who invited me to come. I said, hey, how did you feel like it went? And is it normal for these students to hang around for so long after an event? And he responded with this text. I'm going to read it for you. He said, I agree about the meeting difficulty, yet you did an amazing job. You really shined answering the questions. And about sticking around, I don't think that this is normal for them. So many had things to study for and other plans, but just kept talking about faith and Jesus, etc. As far as I can tell, there were 5 or 6 new people there. They all stayed for 90 minutes. That was the way the Lord showed up. So cool. So that was basically confirming that whatever the Lord was doing that night evidently was not maybe as much as me on stage, but those conversations afterwards, conversations that I won't know exactly how they all ended up, but in Christian ministry, we often talk about planting seeds and leaving the results to God, seeing what God is doing. And so it was a very insightful moment for me. I remember thinking, like, gosh, if I just left after the event, went back to my hotel, not seeing what was going on afterwards, probably would have been a little discouraging day for me. But to see these students hang out for so long afterwards, especially given that many of them were busy with projects and things at that time of the year. It was a really cool moment to just see God working in that way.
That's a really great reminder to even just like be aware and kind of look around, because often, kind of like you're saying, I think we can get caught up in our own lives, what we need to do, and either not be present for those moments where people are wanting to stick around and talk for another 90
Mm-hmm.
minutes, or not see when other people are having those moments as well.
Yeah, because I mean, I've been to plenty of events. Normally, after the speakers they are talking, me they are talking. Normally afterwards, there might be like 3 or 4 people who hang out afterwards as the janitors start coming in and cleaning up, but not like the entire crowd. That was wild. I mean, there were probably more students hanging around for all that time than there were that left.
Cool, cool. So do you find that there is that hunger for kind of the more apologetics and answering those like more philosophical or tough questions about the faith in just in general, from young people to older people?
I would say that there's a hunger, whether or not students quite realize that. Sometimes the hunger is visible, sometimes it's not. But we live in a world where everyone, well, I have to be careful using words like that, like everyone, but so many people, oh my gosh, so many people are interested in spiritual things these days. And we see this in all the different types of spiritualities that are around us, the way people talk about spirituality now. You can tell that there is a hunger for something divine, transcendent. There's a hunger for ultimate purpose and meaning in this world. People are seeking after that all the time. And even specifically Jesus, there was a recent study by Barna, a huge study. In fact, I think it was the largest study that they've ever done, if I remember right, or close to it, called the Open Generation, where they looked at Gen Zers, like high schoolers and young people. Where are they at spiritually? And what this Open Generation study found was that there's actually a surprisingly high number of people who are interested in learning more about Jesus, learning more about what the Bible has to say. I think that although we do see a lot of stuff on the news of like strong antagonism and hate against the Bible and Christianity, there's a lot of people out there who are just curious. They want to learn. They want to find meaning in their life. That was the case with this young fellow who I talked to after my event at Penn State. He wasn't a Christian, but he had been seeking God for a good long while. That led him to the event I was speaking at, that led him to a lot of other things prior, to try and find answers. And I think in a world where a lot of people are thinking about their future, about politics, about where's this world headed, what type of investments do I make, where do I go for college, all these thoughts about our future, people are also starting to think about their eternal future and what it means even after this life. That's going to lead them to questions about God and Jesus and heaven and hell and all that. And that's my space where I'm happy to provide thoughts and answers.
Awesome. It's been great to have you on, hear kind of your journey, your how you're connecting with both young people, colleges, and other people with apologetics. I know for myself that your YouTube channel is a great resource for people to get those some of those big questions, kind of like a primer on them, or get them answered. Because I know you do a lot of like topical videos.
Yeah.
So can you give like a shout out to like where people can find you if they want to learn more about what you're doing?
Sure. Well, yeah, probably my biggest area online is on YouTube, and my channel is called A Christian Perspective with Matthew Tingblad. Shouldn't be too hard to find if you search Matthew Tingblad, or you could go to youtube.com/@achristianperspective. That'll take you there too. And I do answer a lot of questions about why we can believe Christianity is true. Probably even more so, a lot of my later videos have been questions about how we can believe that God is truly good. Because I think in apologetics, I mean, it's one thing to believe that God is real. It's another thing to believe that God is good. And in both cases, we must believe these things or else Christianity falls apart. So lots of challenges people have reading certain passages in the Bible, perhaps that challenge their notion that God is truly good. So I'll look at difficult verses. I'll look at sometimes the problem of pain and suffering, or just other little things that you hear out in culture that challenge the Christian faith, and I'll give thoughts to that and help people move through that. On that note, too, if I can give another plug, I have a book.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I have a book on Bible difficulties, and it's called Why Did God Do That? Discovering God's Goodness in the Hard Passages of Scripture. Some of my YouTube content is from that book, but you'll certainly get a lot more if you pick up the book. That'd be great.
Can people get that on Amazon?
It is on Amazon. It's also on our website, josh.org. We have a store there. You might be able to find it cheaper on josh.org.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us. You can support the show by going to our Patreon page at patreon.com/story516. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We look forward to seeing you next time.